For many people, myself included, Cowboy Bebop is considered to be the best anime of all time. And while it certainly deserves that for its incredible story, exceptional visual style, and fantastic music, there is a more subtle layer to the series that I think really affects people in an emotional way. The concept of loss. Major spoiler warning. For the rest of this video, I will be discussing some major plot points that occur throughout the entire saga of Cowboy Bebop. If you have not watched the series or have only seen bits and pieces of it, I urge you to watch the series before continuing on with this video. Loss is a theme that is constantly brought up throughout the saga of Spike and crew. Whether it's their individual losses or the losses they face as a group, each character has to go through some type of intense loss. This simple factor is such a driving force in this series that it sets up many of the most intense and emotional scenes of the saga, and is what I think is the reason why this series is so highly regarded by so many. It's something that we all can relate to. Growing up sucks. It does for a lot of reasons, but one of those reasons is that the longer you are around on the big blue marble we call home, the more and more you will experience loss. There are obvious things that you are going to lose as a child, like a favorite toy or a baseball game, but there are more substantial losses that are less obvious but much more emotionally hard-hitting, like the death of a loved one or a friendship group falling apart. These are all things that we all have to go through as we get older, and we all deal with these losses in different ways based on our personalities. This is what Cowboy Bebop excels at, as it masterfully shows these different personalities. Underneath the layer of the gritty shootouts, cool space travel, and bounty hunting adventures is a deeply engrossing story of humanity, a character study on loss. The character that has the hardest time accepting the fact that loss is inevitable and coping with the trauma that this inevitability brings is Spike. His inability to prevent the losses he faces in his life is the thing that frustrates him most and is evident from the very first session. In this session, Spike and Jet take on a bounty contract that has them attempting to capture a drug smuggler in Tijuana. Spike tracks down this smuggler and discovers that he is traveling with his pregnant wife, which is later revealed to not actually be pregnant, but she is the mastermind behind the smuggling. Spike's capture attempt concludes with him chasing the couple out of the atmosphere and right into the hands of the police. Not wanting to face her judgment and the consequences of her actions, she goes on the offensive and ends up getting herself and her partner killed. These final events foreshadow the events that Spike and his lover will have to go through. Spike's difficulty to cope with the loss that he faces is evident in his training routine. At the start of the episode, Spike is training right next to Jet and the kitchen, so that as soon as the food is ready, Spike is ready to eat it. At the end of the session, Spike is training all the way up in the bridge, far away from the living room and the kitchen where he normally trains, making Jet have to come looking for him when the food is finally done. This shows, albeit very subtly, that Spike blames himself for failing to capture his target, forcing him to train harder and isolate himself more. Eventually though, as Spike goes through the sessions and loses more and more, he inevitably comes to accept his loss, and makes it his goal to get revenge for this loss. The stories like this in this series is what makes this series so relatable to such a wide audience. Part of the human condition is the fact that we are going to lose in many different aspects of our lives. This is a fact of life, and Cowboy Bebop takes those losses to the extreme to show ourselves just how we can handle those losses. There is almost nobody who can watch this show and not relate to at least one of the characters. Let's take Faye, for example. Her lost memory is quite extreme, and while this actual event doesn't happen to a lot of us, her condition can be seen as a metaphor for our own lives. The loss of innocence. As Faye begins to recover her memory, she begins to remember how she was just a normal schoolgirl living in our era. She didn't have any debts, she didn't have to fight or flight her way out of almost every situation. She was just a normal girl with a normal family. This is relatable to our lives in the 21st century as we all grow up. When thinking back on our childhoods, a lot of us usually come up with one word to describe it: simple. You always hear people talking about how simple things used to be when they were children. When you were a child, so many things were done for you. You hopefully didn't have to worry about things like making sure you had food on the table because that was your parents' job. But as you grow older, more and more responsibility is placed on you, which degrades on that childhood innocence. And in reality, a lot of the problems Faye faces in the series are things that we all face in our world today. Things like debt, finding work, and finding your place in the universe are all things that challenge everyone, everywhere. The finding of one's place in the universe is something that actually brings almost every human being in the series together, if in kind of a dark way. Although we as the audience never see this event in the show, Earth itself has been pretty much made inhospitable due to an accident involving a hyperspace gateway. While the series doesn't go into much detail about how this particular event transpired, this freak occurrence causes the majority of humanity to have to flee our planet and colonize the moons, other planets, and asteroids of our solar system. Imagine waking up one day to see that your house or apartment is on fire and you can't do anything to stop it. Now imagine that on a planetary scale. Every human who once called Earth home now has to find a new place in the universe, not just emotionally or spiritually, but now literally as well. I believe that this event has a real-life counterpart, and that is the effect pollution has on our planet. The thing that binds these two global impacting events is that humans were the cause of both. Humans invented the hyperspace gateways and caused the accident that ended up leaving Earth nearly destroyed. And humans are the cause for the majority of the pollution on our planet. If we continue going at the rate we are, our home will be destroyed and we will all have to find a new place in the universe. And it will be our fault. Throughout the 26 episodes, each main character goes through their own different kinds of loss. Spike loses his lover, Faye loses her memory, Jet loses his arm, and Ed loses her family. Every character goes through these losses and deals with them in different ways. Anger, depression, indifference, and humor are all ways that these characters deal with these losses, but they all lead towards one path: acceptance. These characters eventually just have to accept that loss is inevitable and that they are going to just have to deal with it. Things will never go back to the way they were, and things will never be the same again. The most engrossing aspect of this sense of loss is how the series develops a connection with the viewer. As the series goes on, the crew of the Bebop expands and complex relationships between the characters develop. Faye's introduction to the group epitomizes this with how her relationships with Spike and Jet develop. At first, Spike and Jet do not trust her at all, constantly disengaging her in conversations and not including her in their plans. However, as the series goes on, Faye and the others realize that their motivations align, a steady but uneasy trust begins to form, and their relationships between each other grow. As the viewer watches these relationships unfold and develop, they become attached to all of the characters that eventually call the Bebop their home. However, this home is constantly changing and moving, and the time each character is there is fleeting. As the series begins to approach its end, each of the main characters realize that they all have their own individual paths to walk, and that they have to leave the Bebop behind in order to do so. As each character separates and the group dynamic begins to erode, this same sense of loss that the characters feel is brought through the fourth wall to be felt by the viewer. As a viewer, you do not want to see this dynamic come to an end. You want these characters to stay together and go on wacky adventures throughout space, and you want that group dynamic to last. However, just like friendship groups that fall apart in our own lives, These characters must separate in order to become the people they want or need to be. This inevitability of loss that has been experienced by the characters is now thrust upon the viewer. No matter how much we want it to be different, no matter how much we want these characters to stick together, that is not the story being told here, and there is nothing we can do about it. The fact that there is nothing we can do about loss in our world is what helps us to grow as humans, and these characters' acceptance of this fact helps to move the series forward in an engrossing way. Faye's acceptance of the loss of her old life allows her to see the rare opportunity she has in this second chance. She can use this new life to become whoever she wants to be. Ed's acceptance of the loss of her father for the second time in her life is what allows her to realize that she is her own person with her own choices to make. And Spike's acceptance of his losses, whether that be his best friend, his eye, or Julia, is what allows him to finally face his past and come to terms with his transgressions in his own unique way. Loss is an inevitable part of the human condition, and the way we all deal with loss is unique. However, this fact that we all experience loss is something that brings us all together, and in this experience, we can find hope through one thing: acceptance.